Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you very much for tuning into the program. It's Wednesday, May the 22nd. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly, David Williams. He's produced the program. You'll be speaking with David when you pick up the phone and give us a shout to get in the queue. The topic entirely up to you. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial is 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. So you heard Brian Medore talk about Canada at the Men's World Ice Hockey Championships over in Czechia. Yeah, we won 4-3 in overtime, and yeah, Dawson Mercer scored his third of the championship. But just to add to it, Dylan Cousins scored in overtime, short-handed, and when playing for Canada, Cousins has been outstanding at the U18s, outstanding at the World Juniors, and in 17 games playing for the senior side, he's got 15 goals. So Cousins has become a real go-to. So we've got the Slovaks tomorrow in the quarters. And if you've heard me talk about court sports in the past, you know that I think volleyball is absolutely a far superior sport to basketball. Dave Williams would disagree, and that's fine, because we're talking about sports. There's no right or wrong. But at the Nations League, which is the tournament with all the best countries in the world on the men's side, Canada, we're number 12 in the world. Yesterday we beat Turkey, that's number 15. Pretty solid, 3-1. Stephen Maher, who I really don't like as a player, was outstanding for Canada. Tomorrow we've got Poland. Sort of interesting when you look at the countries and where they're ranked in the world. Poland is number 1 in the world in men's volleyball. So we've got them tomorrow. It's easy to watch it too if you're so inclined. Now, volleyball is seriously popular. I believe it's the most populated sport for amateur females in the country. So there you go. Anyway, it's just Volleyball TV, VBTV, easy app that you can pop up on your smart TV. All right, a couple of quick ones here. It was in 2003 that Swedish professional Annika Sorenstam became the first woman to play on the PGA Tour in 58 years. So that's 2003. I should have looked this up. Who was the first? I guess it was maybe Mickey Wright or Babe Zaharias. One of them's got to be one of them. And Rick Hansen, of course, Canadian icon, he completed his Man in Motion World Tour in a wheelchair at Vancouver's BC Place Stadium, raising money, of course, for spinal cord research. That was in 1987. And this is an interesting one. We can talk about the summer season and the cost to get in and out of this province via air and some of the money that's gone from the provincial government to the various airport authorities. And, of course, the monies that will be spent to bring WestJet's thrice weekly flight from St. John's to Gatwick in London. But it was 118 years ago today, in 1906, that Wilbur and Orville Wright were granted U.S. Patent 821393 for what they call their new and useful improvement in the flying machines. Of course, they're credited with inventing, building, and flying the world's first successful motor-operated airplane. It took 3 years after the patent to actually have their first control-sustained flight. That, of course, was aboard the Wright Flyer, December 17th, 1903, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. All right, there you go. Sticking with travel for a second. I spoke to this one last week, and apparently there's a member's motion on the floor at the House of Commons, and this is just talk about doing the right thing. And, of course, not necessarily can we trust politicians to do the right thing on a variety of fronts, including accepting pay raises when so many people are struggling. And then it's the issue regarding members of Parliament and their travel bills. Okay, so as we all know, as once was famously uttered, they're entitled to their entitlements. But the rules seem to be pretty clear other than this one loophole. So members of Parliament are not allowed to bill the House of Commons for travel for partisan events, like party conventions, caucus meetings. And in addition to that, there was hundreds of thousands of dollars billed last year for travel and all the incidentals that go with it, including some designated travelers. So for designated travelers last year, which was generally partners, spouses of the member, going to partisan events, about $84,000. So We know it's going to be very difficult for them to see the light and do what we all would think and agree, I would say, regardless of your political bent, is that type of spending for partisan events, you're not there doing the people's work. You're there doing party work. You shouldn't be billing anyone but yourself. So anyway, you want to take that on. We could do it. And, furthermore, when we're talking about looking for details about the cost of travel in this province, whether it be notably the Premier or anyone else, we shouldn't have to go through ATIP. We shouldn't have to file an access to information or forward information. It should be public disclosure upon return. We'll give you 48 hours, put forward your disclosed travel bills with incidentals, and off we go. Okay. Yesterday, an announcement here in the province. Interesting, but still some vague unknowns associated with it. So the provincial government has struck a deal with the federal government, $78 million over the next 5 years for seniors' health care. A certain amount of the money is going to go towards personal care workers. Now, there's about 1,500 personal support workers in the province. The two levels of government were unable to tell us what portion of the $78 million would go to personal care workers. And, of course, when we have the big conversations about aging in place, we're going to need the workers. Conceptually, it makes sense. A serious or a significant percentage of seniors would probably choose, based on their overall health, to stay at home versus in a long-term care facility. So we're going to have to get this right. So apparently there's a new contract that includes an increase to wages. They're waiting on the ratification from the workers themselves. And then we're told once that has happened that we'll be getting more details on it. But where does this concept actually land in the minds of different levels of government? I think Minister O'Regan yesterday said it's a more economical approach, and I would suggest that's probably true. If we did the math about what it would take for the required home care hours versus what it costs to be in a long-term care facility, then I think we're probably coming out on the upside, financially speaking, when seniors will be happier and probably safer and familiar surroundings and closer to the family and their friends versus the required amount of time it takes to get used to being out of your own home. And we can take that a step further, talk about things like separating couples and safety on protective care awards, whatever you like. But those $78 million over 5 years, it'd be nice to have a little closer breakdown. In addition to those types of conversations, we've spoken about this before, but it's important to put it back on the radar. So it's preparedness for things like we talked with Shirley Lucas from the Alzheimer's Society and the forecasted numbers of Canadians that will be living with dementia by 2050. And some of those are really extraordinary trends upwards for those under the age of 65. But it's the concept of loneliness and social isolation. So loneliness, of course, is the feeling of being alone. Regardless of how much social contact you have, social isolation is the lack of social connections, period. And they come with distinct concerns regarding your overall well-being. Here's some of the numbers that I got from the CDC. I'll read them again. Social isolation significantly increased a person's risk of premature death from all causes, a risk that might rival those of smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. Social isolation was also associated with about a 50% increased risk of dementia. Poor social relationships, characterized by social isolation or loneliness, associated with a 29% increased risk of heart disease, a 32% increased risk of stroke. Loneliness was associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Loneliness among heart failure patients was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death, 68% increased risk of hospitalization, and a 57% increase of risk of emergency department visits. So all in all, when you look at it in the big scheme of things, we're really going to have to get it right. And we can't be chasing our tails in an after-the-fact world because on top of being safe and dignified and happy, if those risks are what they are, and the most expensive thing in this country is a night in the hospital and a night in the clinic and being in a long-term care facility, so we've really got to get this right. It feels to me, with more and more people likely living longer and healthier, hopefully, and wanting to stay in their own home, the supports have to be in place. So I'd be curious to see once that contract is ratified to get a breakdown about personal care workers, period. The rate of pay, how many we need, and we know it's an extremely difficult job. And it's not just about being there as a shoulder to cry on or to get you a cup of tea and or to have a game of cards. They perform a lot of pretty grueling, difficult, and physical duties in the home, so you want to talk about it. We can do it. All right, some Stats Canada numbers, and I get it. It's hard to feel any of the ease when it comes to inflation. In the big scheme of things across the country, inflation eased to 2.7% in April, down from 2.9% in March. Food inflation is where it's going to be the most stubborn. And I suppose you put in energy, gasoline, and otherwise. Food prices, they talk about them easing, but that's not true. It's a mischaracterization of what's actually happening. Food actually increased again in April, but it was at a slower pace. So it rose at 1.4% versus 1.9% in March. But we all still feel the pinch. And it's hard to understand exactly when we're going to feel like things have been brought back a bit more stabilized. On top of that, when we went through 10 consecutive rate hikes in the benchmark interest rate at the Bank of Canada, we were always told that there was a lag time for the rise in the interest rate to be recognised regarding the easing or the cooling of inflation. But when we know clearly, and even Tiff Macklem at the Bank of Canada himself says that the major contributors to inflation are energy and housing, and yet those are both complicated with these high interest rates. So what's the bank going to look like and talk about with their next scheduled update on where the overnight interest rate lands? And of course, none of us get the interest rate that they refer to as the benchmark, but there's some of the numbers. They break it down in this province, and again, if you say that you're not feeling any break, I'm with you. They talk about the rate had dropped from 3.1% to 2.6% in St. John's alone. That's unbelievable. I'm not feeling it, but those are the updated numbers. Hopefully what that means is we're in that window now where we're going to see some ease of the interest rate because, notably, people who have to renew their mortgage would be the most significant component. Even though, of course, with your line of credit, you get Prime Plus 1. That still has meant an increase in your payments. So if you want to talk about it, we can do it. All right, a couple of quickies. So when I saw this story that the Newfoundland Labrador Liquor Corporation has a recall in place, I had no idea what to expect. But apparently it's for these tumblers that were associated with the Nutri beverages. So they gave them out between April and May, and they're asking you to bring them back. When they're filled with liquid like they're designed to do, apparently they release some sort of contaminant. I don't know how this was discovered. Obviously, someone must have gotten sick. So if you have one, throw it away. And if you need some additional information, there's a toll-free number that I'll give it to you here, and you can always send me a note and I can give it to you that way as well. 1-866-846-1778. So Nutri's work with Health Canada to notify customers, but don't fill up your freebie tumbler, just throw it away. All right, and that, leads me into, as you know, still looking for more information from the provincial government in particular about entities like the NLC. And the recommendations in the PERT report, the Premier's Economic Recovery Team, and or the Rothschild report, which we're not allowed to see, but it's on the desks of in somebody's office at the Confederation Building. So things like the NLC. And people are wondering aloud generally, why sell it? It's a real revenue generator. But of course, even if it's sold off in whatever form or fashion, still all the excise taxes associated with liquor would flow back to the provincial government. So the NLC, Bull Arm, motor vehicle, our oil assets, Marble Mountain, if that's of interest to you, let's talk about it. A couple more before we get to the calls. All right, and sticking on the National Front for a second. So we were told yesterday by the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, that legislation to enable their proposals regarding capital gains will happen before the House rises for the summer break. So it's all about an increase to what they call the inclusion rate, right? So from 1/2 to 2/3 on capital gains above $250,000 for individuals. So it's scheduled to take effect by June 25th, and they're anticipating a pretty significant sell-off because people don't want to pay that additional tax from 1/2 to 2/3. Here's some issues with it, though. I don't know whether or not we're going to get any comment from the other parties about what they think about the capital gains tax and this concept of the rich paying a fairer rate. I'll leave it up to you. Neither party is willing to commit. Certainly the Conservatives will not say where they stand on this capital gains issue. But what it feels like is that they're really underselling how many people would be impacted. They continue to say that they expect some 0.13% of Canadians with an average income of about $1.4 million a year to pay more in personal income tax. The problem there is just how many professionals like doctors and lawyers and engineers and architects and the like and accountants have self-incorporated, and consequently there might be a further complication for more Canadians. Now they'll talk about exceptions that are in place, but then add to it things like your second home, which capital gains would be applied to. Some 11% of Canadians own a second home in the form of a cabin or a cottage. And of course, many people have a rental property. And that 11% of people who actually own a cabin today, there's about the same number or percentage of Canadians who are in the market for one. So I think they're kind of underselling exactly how many people will be impacted by this capital gains. I don't have much to worry about on that front, but hey. Okay. And this is not going away, certainly in the political arena, are the comments coming from PC candidate out in Bayburt, Green Bay, Lynn Paddock. You know what he said, and you can label it however you like. And if you want to talk about it, we can absolutely do it on the program this morning. As touchy an issue as it is, we can't be afraid of those types of conversations. But let's add to it. If we're talking about doctors and recruiting doctors, I'm loath to oversimplify things because that gets us nowhere. And we can absolutely talk about his specific comments. But, does it make any sense that we actually have more medical schools in the country? Every single province and territory is struggling with doctors. There's an extremely low acceptance rate of Canadians applying for med school. It's in and around 7.2%. So there's only 17 medical schools in the entire country. Now, if we're talking about the difficulty to recruit in rural parts of Canada, in the province of Alberta, they've actually got a pretty good idea going here. So they've entertained what they're calling a partnership with their health authority itself to come up with a rural medical education program training centre. We know it's far more likely that Canadians will be willing to stay. We know it's far more likely that folks from rural parts of the country, when trained and get a medical degree, it's more likely they go back to help where they grew up versus how we currently approach it. Add to it, Canadian citizens who have been trained abroad and are fully accredited doctors unable to come home because they can't find a residency. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. And yes, we can focus in on the contentious and controversial comments made by one individual candidate. But if we're trying to really tackle and get a better understanding of what's going on here, there's still only 17 medical schools in the entire country. And acceptance rate is extremely low. For instance, for compare and contrast, in the United States, I don't know how many medical schools they have, but their acceptance rates of American-born students is about 36% versus 7% here. So we've got a lot of work to do to figure this out. And yes, I think recruiting wherever we can has to happen. Because the current state of affairs, like even at Munns Med School, 80 seats, 65 for people from this province. And now apparently we're going to have 5-year return on service agreements in place, which I think is extremely helpful. But in the national scope, 17 schools only, low acceptance rate. So where do we go from here? Now, I'm happy enough to have a doctor from wherever when I need a doctor. I can only speak for myself, but that's my personal position on it. You want to take it on? We can do it. A couple of very quick ones. I want to say good morning and welcome back to work to Mount Pearl Deputy Mayor Nicole Kiley. Amazing stuff. So I'm sure you probably know the story. She was shopping at a Shoppers Drug Mart on Lamarche Road. A car comes through the window. She was pinned for over an hour, seriously injured. She actually had her left leg amputated, and now she's back to work. Exactly 1 year, after she was hurt in that unbelievable freak accident. So welcome back to work, Nicole Kiley. Her comments about how she feels and looking down the road, and of course it's been a long road to recovery, and she seems quite upbeat based on what I can see and tell. So again, bravo. I hope you're doing well, Deputy Mayor, and welcome back to work, and we hope that you're doing great. And also, very quickly, this is an interesting one. So there's going to be a stretch of highway between Musgrave Harbour and Carmaville named after Beaton Tulk. I knew Beaton Tulk a little bit, and of course people will think what they think about politicians, but I thought he was a pretty good guy. And so they're going to name that stretch after him. It's going to be the Beaton Tulk Highway. It's just before he would have celebrated his 80th birthday. So congratulations to the family. They're obviously quite chuffed. And of course, Tulk was in politics here in the province for decades. He actually took a very brief stint at being the Premier between October of 2000 and February 2021. And of course, that's after Brian Tobin stepped down. Then the leadership race that took place, very contentious and divisive inside the party. Roger Grimes eventually defeated John Efford and Paul Dix to become the next Premier. So Beaton Tulk Highway coming to you. Congratulations to the family. All right, very quick one. I mentioned to Dave before we got to the show this morning, is I was trying to recall how many cards were left. And I know some of you might have an issue with gambling. We actually had a call yesterday about a lady who was concerned about the big ALC lottery machines in the grocery stores. And then lo and behold, when I went grocery shopping yesterday, I saw it for the first time. Anyway, it's of course, it's eye-catching once you see where and know where it is. I was trying to remember how many cards were left. In the St. Kevin's Parish, out in the Ghouls, chased the ace. And apparently there was something like 10 or 11 cards left in the deck. In Cape Breton, next week's draw, they're down to only one card, which is exactly what organisers can only hope for, right? The more rounds, the more money. They're going to clear $500,000 in the prize pot. Out in Cape Breton, chase the ace. I'm surprised there hasn't been more of that on the go, to be honest, because it was really quite popular. I mean, there was people lined up around the block out in Ghouls. The Ghouls. We're on Twitter. We're VOCM Openline. Follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, let's have a great show. That only works when you're in the queue to talk about whatever is on your mind. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's begin this morning on line number 2. Ruby, you're on the air.
How are you?
I'm doing okay, Ruby. How about you? I don't know what's going on there. Dave, I'm going to have to put Ruby on hold so we can clean that up. Let's go to line number 1. Say good morning to the Mayor of Stephenville. That's Tom Rose. Mayor Rose, you're on the air.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Paddy Daly. Thanks for having me on.
Happy to have you on this morning.
Anyways, I just wanted to talk about, I guess a bit of a riff, between the province and the feds when it comes to the labor market transfer agreement. And it was a significant contribution from the feds and working with the province. And it's about supporting people with accessibilities and intellectual capacities. And it creates a lot of jobs in our province. It actually creates businesses in our jobs in our province. But it gives dignity to the people and the families that, as a society, we're there to help people in need. And you know, I go back about 40 years in this town that we live in. I sometimes look back at some of the leadership we have with Mr. Ray McIsaac and others. We were kind of the genesis when it came to inclusion and helping people that needed help. And it's my hope, and no real blame on this one to whether it's the feds or the province, but as a mayor, it's my hope that the province and our representatives and the feds and our federal representatives can get to the table and kind of hammer this out, because it's so important. And, you know, we see a lot of corporate social responsibility companies stepping in to support people who need that additional help. But it is concerning for me in Stephenville. I believe we're one of the most inclusive towns in this province in so many ways. And I've seen so much hard work and dedication. But the negative impact that this would have on those individuals, the families, the businesses that could be lost, it's significant. And in a time when trying to find labor, it's challenging. And, you know, if these people got to go under some other form of assistance because they don't have this job, it's still going to drain the feds and the province's coffers somewhere or the other. So
sure. Let me just give let me set the table so people know exactly what we're talking about here. So the labor market transfer agreement is not that old. It was created by the feds maybe about 10 years ago. Last year, there was about $3.5 billion transferred to the provinces and the territories. The most recent federal budget, they cut the number by $625 million. The impact on this province was a reduction of $16.5 million annually. Now, there's still $142 million on the table, but support groups like Avalon Employment and others have said that this shortfall is going to see a severe reduction in their ability to help folks who need support to be gainfully employed. So that's just some numbers for people to consider. Now, you say to sit down with the province and the feds to hammer this out. We had the federal minister responsible, Randy Boissonnault, on this show. Pretty much reading between the lines and or taking what he said at face value, this is not going to stop. He's calling directly on the provinces to pick up the shortfall. Here in Newfoundland and Labrador, the province is going to backstop the next 6 months so that we can figure out what we're going to do here. But it doesn't look like the feds are going to waver one iota on this front. This is going to be the way it is in the future.
And it is challenging, you know, that the feds can't come in on some sort of an equity stake. I know they've been there since 2017. I think they signed that labor market transfer agreement that you cited in those numbers. But, you know, I think it's when it comes to people that need it the most, who's really responsible? Well, families first, communities, province, feds, but we're in this together, Patty. I think it's all levels of government got to support a need of this scale, you know, so that we find the end solution to ensure that we're doing the right thing.
I don't disagree, but we can only take what the federal government has said for the context in which it was offered. They're pretty much declaring that this is going to be the process in years to come. Now, as long as they remain in power, and who knows what happens if the government changes hands, but $625 million is not a major league amount of money when we're talking about cutting away from $3.5 billion. But the reality on the ground is this is going to be really problematic. Like at Avalon Employment Incorporated, they say that this might jeopardize, for instance, their autism program, which is not going to help. Look, I mean, if people just need a little bit of a leg up to have someone be their champion, to advocate on their behalf, because so many people are represented by his group and others, and of which there's some 17 of these similar organizations in the province. People are unemployable. We just have to make the work, the managers and the owners to realize it and to take them on the payroll, because it's been very effective. All these groups have had a certain amount of success, and without their support, there'll probably be whatever number of people in the province who have these exceptionalities that might not be employed, and that's bad news.
Yeah, that's well said, Patty. And before I called you, I was thinking, where's this going to go? And it's my hope, and a challenge to maybe some of the corporations that are out there. We know how much great work corporations are doing in so many ways, and that corporate social responsibility seems to be embedded now for most companies.
For some, anyway.
Really small businesses are challenged, but, having some of these corporations looking at how they can step in and assist people with exceptionalities and accessibility issues, and that I think is so important, so we can integrate all of our people. We can't leave anybody behind.
No. We certainly couldn't. Well, pardon me, we shouldn't. And let's see what the future holds. But it looks like it's going to be the responsibility of the province across the country, the provinces across the country, to pick up the slack that the federal government has done in this most recent federal budget. Anything else on that front? Because I have a couple of obvious questions for you.
No, actually, I just wanted to raise that. It's important to all of us and all those 17 communities and groups that are working so hard. And it's just my hope that the province now, should they not receive or be able to make any gains with the feds, that they'll ensure that these programs continue.
Okay, the obvious one is airport update, because there's been controversial. There was some big whopping promises made by Carl Diamond about all the money that he'd be investing and all the jobs that would be created, restoring some passenger flights and the like. And all that's really been done since he's taken ownership of the airport is federal monies to do some runway renovations or repave or whatever actually happened out there. So where are we? Because it looks like we're at a standstill.
Yeah, well, as a town, we're sort of at a standstill for the development and the plans that Mr. Diamond had. But like we spoke about it last night at one of our meetings, and we're kind of happy in the sense that we just are getting ready to sign an MOU that all cost recovery is going to happen now. Diamond will pay us for any time we respond with the fire department. Up till when it was private, that was a cost incurred by the town as part of the agreement with the nonprofit Signal Airport Corporation. Now, since Mr. Diamond's taken over, there was $2 million on the books for an upgrade of the advanced LED lighting system. Since that, the lighting system has been completed, so it required an additional $1.3 million, I believe, or 1.7.
And where'd that come from? Where'd that come from?
That came from Diamond.
Okay.
That came from Diamond. Yeah, and that was very important because the system was, you couldn't even buy parts for the system was so old, and it had to be upgraded. The challenge was a couple of years ago when the feds announced $2 million, that was just before COVID. COVID happened, everything escalated in cost, but then there was no additional money from the feds. So if we would have kept the airport, the town of Stephenville no doubt would have had to come up with $1.7 million to complete a lighting system, which we didn't have. So we're hoping to get some announcements from Mr. Diamond. It's my hope that commercial traffic will be reinstated once again once final investment decision is made by World Energy and the work camps start here. Stephenville is going to be a very robust area, and if you got 8 to 1,200 people working here coming from all over Canada, all over the province, air service is going to be critical. And the other day I was thinking, Patty, was kind of pissed off a little bit with some quotes from WestJet and Air Canada. And they were talking about, well, in New Brunswick, if we went down just to one airport, how easy would it be for us? And I don't know if you heard anything about that storyline. But, you got St. John, you got Fredericton, you got Moncton, you had Bathurst, you had all these airports. And when it comes to economics, this country, after World War II, actually, there was airstrips built, I believe, every 100 miles. Now, some of them were very, very small. And remember, back after World War II, the planes were very small, only went short distances. But it was about connecting, because in transportation separates developed to undeveloped nations. And we were very strong. So when we had regulation, all airports were serviced. Then deregulation happened. And now they're saying, well, in New Brunswick, maybe everybody should just go to one airport. It's a small province. They're 3, 4, 5, 6 hours away drive. And they're on the mainland. But think about Newfoundland now and Labrador. So here we are in Ireland. We lost our railroad. And
that was our own doing, though.
It's pretty costly. And we got 7 airports in this province. 6 of them got airline service. Stephenville doesn't. Why is that? St. John's got 1 million plus passengers. Gander got 150. Deer Lake got over 300, but they got 100,000 passengers from our area, that we had before.
Yeah, but I guess this is not really, who are you aiming these comments at? It can only be between the airport authority and the airlines themselves. I guess the province has been taken to task with only $3.75 million to be distributed between the 7 airport authorities to try to do things like bring more flights in. But before we go further down that road, okay, I guess it's a win for the city or the town of Stephenville to not have to pay that $1.7 million for the upgraded lighting. But still, if I heard what you're saying, other than that, nothing has happened. And nothing is coming. We don't have any timelines or anything associated with the airport because you know as well as I do, the promises and pledges were extremely lofty. And even if we talk about $1.7 million, that's a drop in the bucket to what we were told initially.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because last night we kind of talked about that, and I said, you know what? What was the alternative? The alternative, you know what it would have been, Patty? Shut the airport down. And if there's one thing that World Energy has said to me, we have to keep that airport open commercially. We got corporate jets. We had a couple of U.S. military C-17s. We got helicopter activity. Airports play a much bigger role than just commercial traffic. But one quick little point I want to make, too, is you got to remember, provinces have put millions and millions of dollars in provincial airlines, the Air Labradors, the PALs, and the feds have put hundreds of millions of dollars in the Air Canadas and the WestJets, but no caveat there. There's no rider that says, we're going to support you, but you got to support our airports because airports create jobs, they're transportation, they're vital links, they're air ambulance, they're for emergency fire protection. They play so many critical roles. And I've always said, if we can't keep our 7 airports in this province running, and I wish Carl Diamond all the best. Some things haven't happened as fast as I want, and I'm sure he hasn't. But you know what? The airport is operating. It's open. Yeah. It's not costing the taxpayers of Stephenville not one penny.
Right. And, you mentioned World Energy GH2. We don't have time to go talk about that really this morning. But, that's one piece of business he has done. And you and I have talked about this in the past. If there's going to be a relationship between World Energy GH2 and the airport, which is not insignificant when we talk about money flowing to the Diamond Group of companies, the town of Stephenville kind of is on the outside looking in. When maybe, just maybe, some of the operational costs and the transfers of money and all the questions being asked by like former Councillor Lenny Tiller and others, they would have maybe seen some revenue side. And so the airport could be still open, regardless if Carl Diamond was involved or not. Because if John Risley was going to sign a lay-down deal on the airport grounds, then I would argue your point that the airport would be closed today.
Well, absolutely. You're 100% right there. But when the deal was done with Carl Diamond, World Energy wasn't announced. Nobody knew about this. So, we were at the point, Patty, that I'd get to a board meeting, a public meeting, trying to get a $50,000 grant to keep the lights on at the airport, and I needed 5 votes. Most times I didn't know if I was going to get 5 votes. So, we were so close to having that airport shut down, and Transport Canada was actually, I think, about ready to start the paperwork to shut it down because of non-compliance, such as the lighting system and line painting and so many other things. So, thank God it's open, and I hope it all the best for Carl Diamond. I know World Energy is going to bring significant economics to our region. Those economics will actually accrue benefits for the airport, and it has been challenging, Patty. Let me tell you, it hasn't been easy.
Yeah, I wish we had time to talk World Energy because Dave wants me to put you on hold, and I wish we had time to talk about the wind proposals because controversial to say the very least. The economics are one thing, the environmental issues are quite another. Mayor Rose, I'm putting you on hold, but I appreciate your time this morning. You're going to speak with David.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. There we go. The mayor's on hold for you, Dave. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 4. Karina, you're on the air.
Patty.
Hi there.
Hi. I'm calling in today about the federal funding towards the wage increase for the home care for aging in place for seniors. Mm-hmm. I find there's a lot of discrepancies. I watched the NTV broadcast, and I also read the highlights. A few things that concern me are they were talking about in the budget there was funding for increase for seniors for home care and so on. When the budget came out, there was nothing in the highlights. That was one thing I heard on your show, is that there was no funding available. And
funding available for what in particular, Karina?
For the home care workers, to help with seniors being able to age in place, to remain in their safe environment, to remain with their friends and family. So there's not a clear definition on where does this money come from or how it's being allocated. I know that in the highlight here on their page it says there's 1,500 personal support workers. Now, according to NAPE, we have 4,000. So where's the discrepancy of 2,500 workers? That's
good question.
That's a big number. Also on the broadcast with NTV, they were talking about sign-on bonuses. So they got to look at that. I mean, I've been doing this since 2002. We've been in it for the long haul, and now they're making reference. I know Tom Osborne said it's really important that we have good workers that are well paid and satisfied. That's exactly what we're all kicking up the dirt over, is that we're not well paid, we're not satisfied, and and there are 4,000 and possibly a few more than that. So by definition, we are home care workers. So you're hearing, the words, what are they calling us? It's everything but a home care worker. So who are they referring to for these increases? Are they talking about LPNs? Are they talking about the CPAs? Because we fall under home care. So for me, it's all over the place. Again, Seamus O'Regan says, in quote, nothing is possible without care workers. They do the work that lets us go to work. And I think there's, really great points that they're making, but, this should be across the board. There's so many gaps in LPN, CPA, care workers, if they want to be called that. But we're the people that get up every morning, that put on our sneakers, that put on our scrubs. This statement of, wage increase to workers who provide assistance and companionship to seniors in their homes. I would love for, Seamus O'Regan or Tom Osborne to come to work with me, because to say that I provide assistance and companionship is so far out in left field.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all know full well what additional duties on top of a shoulder to cry on, a cup of tea, a game of cards. I mean, that's just scratching the surface, obviously.
That's basic, right?
Yeah. So the last raise, last year, made it to $17 an hour or thereabouts. Mm-hmm. And now, even in the reference, a good question you asked, between 4,000 and 1,500, where's the other 2,500? Who are they? Who represents them? But I guess there's a lack of detail. based on one lone fact that there's an agreement that's yet to be ratified by home care workers, and so consequently we don't know how much of the 78 million is going to go towards pay, even though I would suggest that bringing it up to a reasonable rate of pay and understanding how many more seniors are hopefully willing to live at home or wanting to live at home, longer and later in life. Because if we get this wrong, then we can listen to politicians until the cows come home about aging in place and dignity and safety and familiar surroundings. Yes, that's all true, but unless we get all the fundamentals in place, then it's just the concept, and it's unmanageable, because at this moment, given how we're currently structured the system, we won't be able to satisfy this whole concept of aging in place.
No, that's right. And it's really important now for us, where we are in ratification, it's really important for us now to strike while the poker is hot. And, last week I was on this show and I said that the government is who needs to step up. It's not necessarily the agencies. You got a lot of, just taking that number, say 4,000 home care workers. So that gives us at least 4,000 individuals, seniors or people with disabilities, and or something, of a different nature, that depend on us. So, again, coming back to the respect and coming back to what we actually deserve, I've been doing this since 2002, and, for me, I bring a lot of experience. I bring a lot to the table for the individuals that I work for, and the different things that they're suggesting, or just the companionship. I got a real problem with that, because this is a far cry. Like, that's basic. And, it's time for them to pick up their pens and get down to the brass tacks, because, home care workers are, looking for what we feel that we deserve, not LPNs and CPAs, putting down and what we're doing. We should collectively all be coming together for the same common goal of the utmost respect and care for all of our loved ones. It's not just, people that's, less fortunate than us that don't have the family supports and home care comes in. Like, you got to look at this for the bigger picture.
Understood.
There's a substantial amount of people in the province that depend on us, and we do as much or more. And I said this last week, we do as much or more because we're flying with one wing on our own. We do not have nobody else to go to, and it's time for them to stand up and realize what we contribute. And again, we should be home care should be health care. We are doing nothing any different.
Understood, Karina. I'm glad you made time for the show this morning. Thanks for this.
No problem. You have a great day.
The same to you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, so let's get back on track with the breaks. Keith's in the queue on line number 3, wants to talk about search and rescue. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Good morning, Keith. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Paddy. Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I would like to speak about... we had a little accident out at sea there this week. We was on a fishing trip last Thursday evening, and one of my crew members slipped on the deck and broke his hip, the rotating coupler right up in his hip. And anyway, I got over to Goose Bay, Coast Guard radio, and told them what was happening. And anyway, they got a doctor on the line for me and told me to try to get off the deck, keep him warm. So we got into the galley and wrecks of pain. But anyway, what I was going to say is I thank him very much for it, because from the time I called till everything was straight, 3 hours, he was on the scene and taking the guy up into the helicopter, which was very fast. I thought it was. But I give them a lot of praise, because it's not easy coming from that helicopter than on a boat just on a rope or something. And they were very, very nice people.
Yeah, to see them in action is really impressive, and the amount of training that goes in to be able to conduct those search and rescue missions is extraordinary.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, but it was, yes, it was pretty fast. I thought it was, and I thank them very much. It's good that we got them around.
And how is your deckhand?
They took him to Gander, and he's home now. He come home next day. I was up to see him yesterday, but he's still there. You know, in pain sometimes if he moves either bit, but he had bone broke and he had a lot of fractures there.
Well, I wish him a speedy recovery. Well. Good news.
Yes, me too. Yeah. But anyway, something else I'm going to speak about now is about the election. I see it on there that Mr. Burt was on. He's running for the Liberal Party here, and he was on saying that I was supporting him the way that he was saying it. But I'm not in no support of the Liberal Party. I always was. But as of now, no. He called me. He said that he was calling me occasionally. He called me about a week or so before he planned on running for it. And then he called me after and asked me what I thought, and I told him just as it was. That was no vote from me, and I said any fisherman, after the going on we've had again this year with the crab fishery, that there's no fisherman that should vote for the Liberal Party. So anyway, Mr. Burt told me, he said, as of tomorrow morning, he said I might phone and say I got to cancel it, that I'm not going to run. So I don't want to hear, you know, my name. He had no business to be on saying my name. I'm having calls from fishermen now is ready to shoot me, really. You know, because he knew that I was a supporter of the year when he was doing that demonstration. And when I went over there and seen Richard Martin, who was married to my niece's daughter, that made me worse towards government. Because it was no one's fault that was there, them horses, and that only government. So I would like to encourage any fisherman to vote PC. I'm not telling him what to do, but Mr. Burt didn't mind get on saying my name, so I don't mind telling people what, you know, who to vote for. It's
okay,
up to themselves,
and fair enough. They'll do it as they see fit. Just out of curiosity, have you actually heard an idea regarding whether it be the price-setting formula and the percentage of the market price going to harvesters and processors or outside buyers? Have you heard any good ideas from any political party? Because at this moment of time, it's either one, that the politicians really don't understand the industry, or two, they possibly don't care. Because I haven't heard much in the way of ideas floating around. Lots of criticism, and that's nature of the beast. That's the way politics works. But it'd be also nice if we heard some people with some actual ideas how to make it better, so we don't have the same standoffs on the same species year after year after year.
After year, Petty, you're right. Same thing. The thing is that you had all the plants sold out. We haven't got the capacity now for doing the crab, and the crab is something that must be done in a quick time. You know,
yep.
Do it as fast as you can. It's a shellfish. And it has to be done. And here we is now, boats this year coming here, have had wheat for a week. 4 and 5 days, up to a week. When the plants was around like it used to be. Here in last year, there was a crab plant here in 20 and different places. But now we haven't got a plant right here on the Bayvert Peninsula. So there's things that can be done, but there's no concern from government. There's no concern from buyers. There's no concern from union about it. There's no knowledge of it whatsoever.
Yeah, they were talking about expanding capacity, and of course, that becomes a tricky piece of business, doesn't it, Keith? Because, you know, when we heard that there was some outside buyers that were possibly coming, and there was more buyers' licenses for people living here, and of course, they could only buy it here and ship it out. They couldn't buy it and process it here, which is also half confusing. But then it was the big guys with the deeper pockets able to offer more money than the floor price. So the floor price was $3.25, I believe, is what we started at. And, you know, then we were at $4.50, $5. There's a local here in my region who was not unable to get into it, even though he had a license to process this year, because he couldn't afford the going rate. So 2 questions. Do you know how much crab is out of the water so far this year? And number 2, what kind of price are the boys getting where you were? Or the harvesters getting where you were?
I wouldn't know how much is out of the water. I haven't heard. But there's misunderstanding, you know. First he started off, they couldn't pay $2.60. They went up a bit higher. They couldn't pay that. They couldn't do nothing with that. The next thing, it was up to $4.50. And I hear that there's people still paying $4.50 for it.
Yeah, I heard the other day that about a third, but that was almost a week ago, about a third of the tack has been landed. And of course, we're talking about 13 million pounds.
Yes, could be. I'm not quite sure.
No problem.
But there is misunderstanding somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
There's no one too much concerned about it.
I think that's a key feature of the fishery is a miscommunication or misunderstanding. I think that can be applied to most everything we talk about in your industry.
That's right. But we got no one there to fight for. The government is not worried about nothing on it herself. That's like the year we had a chance to ship out some seal skins because we have a seal plant, and we had a chance to ship them out, take the fat off and ship them out like was always done, send to China for tannery. But they wouldn't allow us, they wouldn't give us exception to do that. So that's what we got in government.
So would that be a federal exception you're looking for there?
No,
or
it wasn't.
Provincial?
No, it wasn't. That was provincial.
Okay.
So that's what we got there, and that's why I got no more support for them.
Fair enough.
I'm not talking about there's some people in the Liberal Party. There is some of them there that is good people. I'm not saying that. But Mr. Paddock was on talking about the fishery. They tried to give him a bit of a going over about races or something, but no, he's not. The most ones is herself now that's trying to put him down.
Yeah, now I guess he said what he said, and it opened up the door. Whether or not it was just clumsy or that's in his heart, I can't speak for them. I've never met him, so I don't know what's in his heart, and so I can't pretend to know. But the way he put it just opened up the door. I mean, it was a bit of a self-inflicted wound. People can evaluate it as they see fit. Keith, I got to get off to the newscast here, but I appreciate your time this morning.
Okay, Paddy, thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Very quickly in search and rescue, I suppose we should repeatedly put it out there that the federal government really needs to acknowledge the needs in Labrador. There's no infrastructure or capacity for air search and rescue in Labrador. Amazing. So there has been expanded ground search teams in the Big Land, which is good news. Then, of course, when we had the inquiry into the loss of Burton Winters, the confusion and the miscommunication about where provincial responsibility ended and federal began. But when the federal government came to town, and it was then Defence Minister Anita Anand, talking about some $38-point-something billion over 20 years to deal with Canadian NORAD responsibilities. And I believe she was asked at that time, where does the federal government understanding of and the acknowledgement of the need to expand or to actually to begin to include air search and rescue capacity and or fast rescue craft or the like in Labrador, because at this moment in time, there's none. Let's take a break for the news. When we come back, we're talking to Reg about healthcare on the Bonavista Peninsula, and then we're speaking with you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Reg, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Not too bad this morning. How about you?
Good. I'm calling. I'm with the Concerned Citizens Group, who organized the healthcare forums before in Bonavista the last couple of years.
Yep.
And so we have planned another public meeting for tomorrow night, and it's at Discovery Collegiate High School tomorrow night at 7 a.m. And we're asking everybody to come out. Since we've had our last meeting, I mean, we haven't disappeared. Unfortunately. Government connections and the health authority, a lot of those people have gone silent over the last little while. We don't know what the problem is. Well, I guess we know what the problem is. There has been no answers to a lot of the questions, and basically a lot of things, there's basically nothing resolved in Bonavista. We did sign 2 doctors last year.
I was going to say, I thought I recalled 2 more doctors on the peninsula.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we lost a doctor last year who had private practice, and we have another doctor who was finished in the end of August.
Okay.
Okay, and we were told we were being we were included in the family care program for a clinic, and they came out a while ago, the health authority, and told us that they had some people, some staff hired. But when we did a bit of digging, they had 2 nurse practitioners. Unfortunately, those were 2 nurse practitioners who were already working in Bonavista, and who are going to, who still have a full slate of clients already. So I don't know how that's going to help alleviate the problem with the two doctors who left as a replacement for those people who need a family doctor, right?
Yeah, well, that's the concern everywhere, isn't it? I mean, the plan is to have some 35 collaborative care clinics around the province, but everyone points to, I think, the right area is unless there's more health professionals added to the system versus just moving people around and or using nurse practitioners, for instance, in Bonavista, who are already there and have them part of the clinic, that didn't really expand access. It just sort of changed the way the clinic was set up.
Yeah, it do. And we also, basically almost 2 years ago now, we lost our chemo. We had chemo in Bonavista. And going back to almost 2 years now, I think since last winter, actually, it went completely. Before then, it was sporadic. There was times they had to move to Clarenville. Anyway, we were told that chemo was going to return last September. It hasn't returned. And, I mean, there's a lot of other issues involving chemo. We have most people who travel for chemo, they have to have blood work probably a day or two prior to their chemo. And since it's in Clarenville now, we have patients now who are being asked to come to Clarenville a day or two before for their blood work, when obviously, they can get it in Bonavista. So, I mean, it's creating a lot of issues for people, right? And so this meeting tomorrow night now is basically, it's not about doctors, as the last one turned out to be, but is more or less of what we started out in the beginning was to try to cut back on the erosion of services in our area, right?
Fair enough.
And the meeting tomorrow night now, like I said, is more or less about issues that people are dealing with that can be fixed even if you don't have a doctor. I mean, if we got a dozen doctors tomorrow, what's the point if you still got to drive to Claremont for your blood work? I mean, it's crazy, right, this stuff? So anyway, that's basically what I wanted to say. And I'll say it again, is at Discovery Collegiate tomorrow night. And it's 7 a.m. That's the Discovery Collegiate High School.
I appreciate the time, Reg.
Thanks for taking my call.
Anytime.
Thanks for the time.
No problem. See you,
Bye-bye.
Reg.
Have a good day.
You too, sir. Bye-bye. All right, let's roll line number 2. Charlie, you're on the air.
Yes, morning, Paddy.
Morning to you.
Paddy, just a quick thing on icebergs. Looking at a couple of weeks ago, looking at the chart, and it said 8 in our corner of the bay. Most of it, the block was on land, but the corner. So we rushed down to have a look at the icebergs on the Salvage, where you can see it over the bay, and there was nothing. And I noticed last night they said 11 in the same quadrant, and the report is that there's nothing showing from Salvage in the bay at all. So I wonder how they do their count, and how can they be so off?
I have no idea. But I do know, like, for instance, in Iceberg Alley there, Twillingate and surrounding area, a pretty poor iceberg season so far this year. And bergs that are there are so far offshore that they're, hoping for a change in the weather or the wind to maybe get them a little closer so they can have the experience that people enjoyed last year. But I guess it's kind of hit or miss. And this year there was so seriously thin ice on the Labrador's north coast and other areas, which meant that some of the icebergs were melting quicker than they had in the past as well. So, and talk about the seal hunt for folks that were in that area. Open on the 24th of April, ended the same day. Not enough ice.
Yeah. Well, that block they're talking about, it's in the heart of the bay, and you would have to see it from the Salvage Head. You can see right out through there, and of course they show up very well. So I don't know what's happening with that chart, but it's certainly not accurate. If people drive somewhere to see those icebergs based on that information, they're going to be very disappointed. Paddy, on the diamond thing, I'm sure somebody's called in about this. That airport. Would that airport become a cash cow if World Energy takes off and with all that traffic and so on, do you think?
Well, it remains to be seen. I don't have a crystal ball on that front, but if there's going to be a significant number of jobs and business to be conducted and the airport authority itself can attract some regional routes, maybe. I mean, it could be, but I think we're a long way away from that. Plus, add to it very clear comments coming from both Air Canada, WestJet in particular, not interested in establishing more regional routes here. They've really got their sights set on Western Canada and international routes. So it would be possibly a cash cow if the air carriers came to town, but I think that remains a major question.
It seems to me that Diamond was looking at the development there with the World Energy, which was being talked about at the time. It seems like to me he used the drones and other talk of big business to get his hands on the airport so he could benefit from that traffic that he saw coming. I guess that theory has been advanced here before now, but it seems to me it was a lead-in that was a little bit misleading.
Well, at this moment in time, I think that's a fair characterization. I mean, I actually talked about this earlier in the program. So there's been some monies spent for runway and lighting upgrades, and apparently $1.7 million of that came from Diamond himself or his Diamond group of companies. And Mayor Rowe says, that's money that would have fallen to the responsibility of the town, and they didn't have it. But that's a long way from the hundreds of millions of dollars they talked about. In cargo, the manufacturing of cargo drones and reinstating passenger traffic and all the monies and the jobs that were pledged or promised, whatever the right word is, and little to nothing has come to pass. And some of the money for runways, that came from the federal government. So it looks like there's pretty much a distinct lull in the action. And I think people are justifiably jaded about what they thought was potentially coming versus what has happened at this moment in time anyway.
Well, when you got to go to a lottery winner to get investment money, it would make you wonder. That would be a little bit of a giveaway there. But anyway, I'll go on to something else.
Okay.
The U.S. election, as I've mentioned before, I'm playing 2 and 3 people a day from the States. The fear of what's happening there with he's leading in most of the swing states, the fear is palpable. People are talking about leaving. What's the price
they
of
talked about
housing
that in 2016,
and so on.
Yeah, but they talked about that in 2016 too. Look, I try to pay very little attention to it because I find it to be infuriating. But yeah, the polls are pretty clear. I mean, Biden is close to some of the blue wall states, but Trump is ahead in virtually all of the swing states. Yeah. So yeah.
And what I was getting at was the fear factor. In the U.S., I don't blame Trump. I blame that 35-40%. They were around in the Ku Klux Klan days of the 1920s, in the North especially, Indiana and so on. There was literally millions that joined that group at the time. In fact, they pretty well took over Indiana, and it was based on fear of blacks, of immigrants and so on, Catholics coming in and Irish and you name it. And then pre-World War II, the Nazi movement was very, very big in the States, using the same message of fear of using Hitler's pretty well thing of a master race and how the whites were going to be affected. Trump has basically tapped into that same group, and they're a large group. They're a large minority. And I think that's underestimated because if you'll notice what he says and what a lot of people behind him, Stephen Miller and so on, it's immigration. It's the taking away of the white rule, being replaced in 1941 by more color people and mixed race and so on. And that fear factor is he's figured out this, and that to me is where he's getting his support.
Well, immigration is the number one concern on the political front. I guess you can add in some social conversation regarding abortion or what have you, which has long been the divide between the two major parties in the United States. Look, I don't know what's going to happen, but he's been pretty clear on his plans, no matter how you slice it. And, you can only take the man at face value for what he said. I mean, mass deportation camps. And, I haven't heard a whole lot about it lately. Some of the border security numbers are not exactly off the charts in the bad way in the United States. But again, it becomes an unmanageable conversation because there's not a whole lot of reality attached to political discourse in the United States by the look of it. And I think some of that has seeped north of the border, and that's unfortunate for everybody. But I'll admit, I'm not following it very closely because I find it just a bit too frustrating, if not infuriating, because a lot of it is really mindless.
Just a an anecdote there, which I believe I've related on here before, but I was reading a book by J.D. Salinger's daughter. She was in a class in, I think it was Connecticut, and when John F. Kennedy was shot, remember he was a Catholic, the whole class got up and cheered. That's how much hate there was, even back in the 60s, because they didn't want him in power, you know. Last thing I want to mention is I've brought this up a couple of times. The town councils. I don't know if anybody expressed any interest in helping people get gardens started. I call it a backyard garden initiative. There must be progressive councillors out there who would like to see older people especially, their gardens dug up so they can grow their own crops and so on. I was hoping to hear more on that, but have you heard any comment on that yet?
No, I've heard standalone organizations like Food First and others talk about that concept, but no, I haven't heard a specific municipality and or a municipal leader do much on that front, and I think it's pretty important. Number one, we just have to get away from the antiquated bylaws that are in place municipally speaking, because we're working off something that's decades old, if not almost a century old, from the UK. So that doesn't really make any sense. So I wonder if there's anyone going to pick up the charge. There's some monies around for it too, which is, I think, of concern for municipalities. They don't really have a whole lot of revenue they can generate, but there is money out there for it.
They could get a back or a digger and do 10 or 12 plots of land easily. As you said, there's this money available, and there's people out there. I know of one who visited the garden a couple of days ago. He was wondering about getting his garden dug up in the back, you know. But anyway, it's just a thought. I was hoping somebody else would pick up on that, but I guess we leave it at that. Thanks, Patty.
I welcome their call if they're so inclined. Appreciate the time, Charlie.
Okay, sir.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, let's go ahead and take a break. How are we doing out there, David? All right, let's take that break. When we come back, plenty of time for you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Good morning, Danielle. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing okay, thank you. It was great to listen to the Marine Atlantic conversation on your podcast. Thank you for having that. That's fantastic.
Happy to do it. Just a quick note for people listening. There's some sort of gremlin in the system where Friday's show has not been posted, or people can't find it. We're working on it. So if you're someone who's been looking to find last Friday's show, we are on it. I just wanted to get that out there because that just slipped my mind. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Thanks, Patty. I just wanted to follow up because I was listening to the interview with the Marine Atlantic representative talking about, the service with the changes that they're making for commercial traffic and also with pet-friendly cabins. My experience, I was speaking with you before, traveling with a pet was less than acceptable or safe for me or for my pet. I've had multiple letters sent to Marine Atlantic that haven't been dealt with effectively at all. And so they keep coming back with the idea that they're going to have more pet-friendly cabins on the newest vessel, which is fantastic. They have 30. They're forgetting a couple of key factors here. First and foremost, the Marine Atlantic vessels are not a destination, right? They are a essential means to get us to another destination. We are traveling not to get on that ferry by choice, to have a good time. We are traveling to or from the island, and that is our way, on or off. So it is essential that we get to use it, and therefore it needs to represent the traveling needs of the public. With that in mind, my experience recently on the ferry was that they have 7 pet-friendly cabins out of 150. The general population has a 10 to 20% rate of allergies. I live with allergies. I respect it hugely. However, 66% of the population travel with pets, or have pets, rather, sorry. So their math right now doesn't reflect that. So it's very easy that they're exploring ways to change their policy. The easiest way is to reverse that and have, 15 cabins that are guaranteed pet-free. And that if you're somebody who's living with an allergy that you need that, then you can get access to a pet-free cabin. Whereas the bulk of people who are traveling with pets then can get a cabin. The second part of that is what they do have currently, which are, leave your pets on the car deck, which is deemed unsafe for humans. Right? So it's unsafe. You're not allowed down on the car deck once it's. So why are pets there at all? They are living beings. The second part of that is their current kenneling system is basically a set of cubbies and a wall that if you have a pet that can travel, say, in a kennel, which mine can't, he's got confined space. He can't deal with confined spaces. Then this system is basically a set of cubbies in the wall that you have to bring your own kennel and then put your pet up on this cubby, and then you have to bring your own straps to tie that in because it'll fly out in the middle of like a rough seas, and you can't even sit with your pet while you're there. There's nowhere for you to wander to get a fresh air with your pet. You can only get out on this one little tiny piece of AstroTurf. There's no chairs. There's no place to sit and be with your pet inside that little kennel area or anywhere close by. And then, of course, the preferred way then, because there's no other options, is to book a cabin, and there's not enough of them. So, my issue when I was traveling on the way off the island in the spring was that I had booked, 3 months in advance, and I have a special needs pet, and because of the backlog, they had lost, I think, 6 days of travel for weather. I managed to somehow lose my pet-friendly cabin. I still had a cabin. They just wouldn't let the dog in it. I don't think that is a reasonable situation to force on me when they have a backlog.
But what's the option, right? If there's weathers that cause cancellations, and then, of course, try to clear up the backlog, and not everyone who's going to get what they booked, if we say, for instance, that there's been 6 successive crossings cancelled. So when those issues present themselves, wherein lies the options?
Well, why not let me bring the dog in the cabin and clean it after?
I think for the obvious reason is, adding to whatever work schedule is in place with the time they take to turn around. I assume that's what would be the answer coming from Marine Atlantic, is that they have these protocols in place for a reason. And I would imagine cleaning is a big part of it.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. So they're going to clean after every vessel crossing anyway, right? Like they're going to clean the cabins in between because the next crowd of people are coming in. So again, it's like you've got an extreme situation where you've got people backed up for days. They all still need to travel. I'm traveling personally for work, right? I was already 4 days late for work by the time this crossing even happened. It was going to make me... and so... then in that extreme situation, why not say to everybody on board, or for the next couple of crossings while they clear the backlog, we got 2 or 3 crossings, is to say to everybody, we are doing our best to get everybody across as fast as possible and as safely as possible. If anybody out there has an allergy, alert us and we'll make sure we don't put you in a cabin that's just had a pet in it. Because they've got email connections with everybody, right? It's an easy question to ask. And the bulk of the people can then be brought across safely, efficiently, and you can make sure that the cabin is cleaned extra special if you've got a dog in it, but you're not putting somebody in it right after who has an extreme allergy. The other immediate thing they can do right now is to change the number of cabins to pet-free cabins. So you have a guaranteed number of cabins that have never had a pet in them, and that's, say, 30 cabins. And then all the rest may or may not. But if you're traveling like I travel, like I have severe allergies. When I go out to eat, I always self-identify, right? And so if people are traveling, they can self-identify and be guaranteed to get a cabin that has never, ever had a pet in it. Because the chances that way, you're never going to have as many people traveling with allergies as you will with people who have pets, because this is their only way to get off and on the island. Not everybody can travel on a plane with a pet, right? So their only other option is the ferry.
I understand. And look, I personally love dogs. I can't really deal with cats because I'm quite sensitive to them regarding an allergy. But if I was someone traveling on Marine Atlantic, I really do, just speaking for myself, need a cabin where there's never been an animal. because I know how my body's going to react. You know, plus, I don't even really think it's a very good idea for animals to be allowed in the fuselage on an aircraft. I have immediate reaction to that as well. So I don't know what the right answer is and what the percentage of cabins for pet-free and or pet-friendly could or should be. But I think when we talk about weather-related circumstances, I don't know if we're ever going to come up with the ideal or the perfect solution. I get your suggestions, and whether or not they are going to resonate inside the heads or the minds of folks in Marine Atlantic, I have no idea. Anything else you'd like to add this morning?
Yeah, I think that the other key factor is that there is a treatment of people when they're traveling, in my case, that my job is less important. So the cavalier attitude that they had towards me, which I think is there's an attitude at Marine Atlantic that is, there seems to be a cavalier nature. It's that, well, then you can wait for the next crossing that will have a pet-friendly cabin 2 more days. And that was a more reasonable option when I'm traveling for work than, okay, we'll make sure to charge you extra and we're going to get a cleaner in, or, we have a whole deck. They have 2 decks of cabins. One deck is pet friendly. One deck is pet free. There's a lot of different solutions they can enact right now that keeps the people and keeps the traffic flowing, and it keeps people safe. But right now, they are not even willing to entertain that it's more about their cleaning, which they're going to do between every travel anyway. And if they're not, does anybody know that? Like, I'm assuming when I come in that I'm getting a clean cabin. Am I not? Right? So anyway, just want to flag that it's a lot easier than what they're making it. And then the fact that for people traveling for commercial, like that's the other question, what's the difference ultimately between a commercial traveler, as in a person with a truck, right, or me traveling for my job? Like, we're all traveling for our jobs. Right? Understood.
Yeah, I mean, there would be some pleasure travel, but lots of people will be traveling for jobs, including the commercial truck driver we spoke to yesterday that initiated the call with Mr. Mercer at Marine Atlantic. I appreciate the time, Danielle. Anything else quickly, because I do have to get to the break.
Okay, thank you. Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, let's take that break. When we come back, Katie Power. She's the Industry Relations Representative with the FFAW. There was a call that prompted this conversation with Katie about ongoing seismic work and what that means on the spawning grounds. And, of course, maybe we'll touch down and see if there's any updated information regarding amendments to the Atlantic Accord and consultations with the industry about the offshore wind possibilities. Katie Power, right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3 and say good morning to the Industry Relations Representative with the FFAW. That's Katie Power. And good morning, Katie. You're on the air.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to the program.
Happy to be back.
Great. So there was a fish harvester. I'm not sure what community he fished out of, but the real distinct worry was the ongoing seismic work. Now, I know there was some actually marine seismic survey seminar that you guys held back in March, but his worry was that the seismic was taking place on spawning grounds in shallow water. I look at your website and it says the seismic work is being done around the Hibernia and the Hebron platforms. Can you set the table for us exactly what's going on and the level of worry that you have?
Right. So there is an ongoing seismic program this summer. It's happening right now. It is a smaller scale in the past programs. It is just sort of underneath the Hibernia and Hebron platforms. I believe I heard somebody speak about this a month or 2 ago. They're sort of, what they're out there trying to do is confirm what oil reserves are existing there and sort of see if there are any undiscovered oil nearby. They sort of call these subsea tiebacks. So it's a smaller program, and it is more or less within the existing safety zones around those structures. So it's the risk for fisheries interactions is considered low in this case.
Yeah, do we happen to know, and I shouldn't put you on the spot here, but is this Oilco conducting this, or is it ExxonMobil, of course, would be involved in those 2 platforms?
The industry folks that I'm interacting with on this is ExxonMobil, yeah.
Okay. So in the broader scope of things here regarding seismic, the province engaged in what they deemed to be a pretty successful seismic project. They brought some 8 new players and record land sales annually at the CNLOPB. They walked away from it a couple of years ago saying they had enough data on hand. But there's been long, well-documented concerns coming from the fishing industry, whether it be Scotland, Iceland, or anywhere in the North Sea. Describe what we understand about the relationship between marine life and the health of marine life and seismic programs.
Yeah, it's definitely a well understood concern for the fishing industry. We've always been, advocating for mitigation of impacts of seismic. We do have something called the Fisheries Liaison Program. So what that does is we have FFAW staff sort of member, they're a contract worker, on board the seismic vessel to ensure that there are no fisheries interactions and to mitigate, gear and that sort of thing. But with respect to the potential damages of seismic surveying, unfortunately, there's not a lot of research out there. So as a role for FFAW is we're continuously advocating for more research. We need there to be more conclusive evidence around what is actually happening underneath to, these ocean ecosystems. In terms of when you look at other jurisdictions, seismic has been going on for a long time. But when we were first doing seismic back, say, in the 80s or the 90s, we weren't considering fisheries concerns at that time. So the long-term research that exists in, how does it affect spawning? How does it affect recruitment? What about the physiological changes? The disturbance mechanisms, these sorts of things. We don't have a lot of long-term research on that. So our role is to advocate for more research. So this year, and with every year that there's seismic surveying ongoing at the same time as the fishing season, for our members, we ensure that there is a research program happening at the same time. So we do have a research program with DFO and Dr. Corey Morris, who's done research on seismic in the past. He is on the water right now, and he is out there doing some research so that we have something to build upon in future years to better understand what is actually happening out there. I mentioned other jurisdictions. This long-term research, there is some in Norway, but again, the research it's very inconclusive. You can't really say one way or the other if you can isolate that it's seismic that's causing, say, these startle mechanisms or what isn't. There's a lot of anthropogenic or human-caused, human-induced sound underwater, and to isolate the changes that are seen to seismic is difficult. But also, generally speaking, the research that we have, while I will say is minimal, it does say that, there's not a lot of conclusive evidence that says that there's issues with recruitment or there are these, deep changes to the ocean ecosystem. But I will say that, an absence of a response is not indicative of an absence of an impact. We just need more enhanced research to sort of prove one thing or the other.
And it's the whole concept of trying to coexist, exactly, on the oceans between the oil industry and the fishery and other industries that, do work on the water. So the problem is in some of these protected areas because, Canada has a commitment for X percentage of the landmass to be protected and for marine refuge and the like. And, what comes to mind immediately is the northeast slope. So oil industry in, fisheries out. When in fact we're talking about protecting coral and the seabed, we don't have to use gear that drags the ground, but certainly any oil impact out there would be concerning the coral and the seafloor itself. So how does the conversation sound about that coexisting, especially in these protected areas? Because it seems to be a concept of picking winners and losers.
Absolutely. You're 100% right. I do think, collaborative working relationships between FFAW, fishing folks, and the oil and gas industry, it will benefit everybody in the long run in terms of, these mutual beneficial relationships and in terms of mitigation. It's both. We both have two very important industries to the economy of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we have to sort of preserve and protect those and be mutually respectful in the best ways we can. But then when you come to the Northeast Slope situation, we have, even particularly, I haven't been in this role for relatively that long. It's been 2.5 years. And even in the work that I've done in that little time, I've been continuously crying out the hypocrisy that exists in that area in terms of oil and gas being allowed to drill in these slopes, but we can't even use suspended fishing gear. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. We've lobbied that to, DFO and to the board and as many occasions as we can, and that this doesn't make sense to our members, and we don't understand the rationale there.
Yeah, because, the suspended gear in the water column has no relationship with the seafloor, period. So I'm glad I asked about the Northeast Slope in particular, which I believe off the top of my head was like 64 square kilometres. So not a huge protected marine refuge, but significant nonetheless. Anything else on that front before I have one more for you, Katie?
Something that, that is worth noting is that, a lot of the times the companies will come back to us and say, well, it's just exploration, so we don't really know what's going to come of it. But to our members, it's, okay, what are you exploring for if you don't plan to, further develop and expand on those areas? So really, where will the conversation go once you drill and say you find oil and you want to expand that area? Then what happens? I really don't know what their defense would be in terms of, okay, you're going to, prop up an oil platform out there now. I just don't know what the forward-looking rationale there is for them.
Well, because exploration includes the two, seismic and punching holes in the seafloor. I mean, it's as fundamental as that. So obviously the interaction and the goal is to identify hydrocarbons and proceed if there's enough recoverable oil to justify whatever business model. So anyway, we'll leave that one there. Last one. I know there's been some consultations that have taken place, but I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see what the amendments of the Atlantic Accord look like and the number of proponents that have been kicking the tires on the offshore wind possibilities. Has there been any advancement to your knowledge? Because I know you've been involved in some of these consultations, but it seems to be a lot of eerie silence lately.
Yeah, so what I think is sort of going on now in terms of the really high-level Bill C-49 kind of conversations, right now there's a pause for, summer and however I don't know a lot about politics specifically, but I know that the Senate is picking up the Bill C-49 sometime this fall. So that's sort of when it has to be read through the Senate. So that's sort of, I think, when conversations will ramp up on that a bit more. In terms of, in the meantime, the conversations that are happening on, offshore wind, we do meet, like FFAW, other fishing industry groups in Newfoundland and Labrador. We do meet fairly regularly with Natural Resources Canada, the Regional Assessment Committee for Offshore Wind, and different levels of provincial government to just sort of keep the focus, I guess. I mean, of course, I'm strictly speaking from a fisheries perspective, but to keep the fishing lens at the forefront in terms of our concerns. But again, I do I hear what you're saying, in that, it does feel kind of stale right now. There was a lot happening, and now there's sort of not a lot happening. It's more, I think, that it's the timelines are sort of slowing. They're approaching, but we're in a bit of a lull. In terms of the regional assessment for offshore wind in Newfoundland and Labrador, that committee is to have their final draft of their report, so their recommendations, I guess, is to be drafted in September. So I expect that, when the Senate picks up again and this draft report comes out, there'll be a lot more to talk about at that time. I appreciate the time this morning, Katie. Thanks for doing this. All right. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. It's Katie Power, the Industry Relations Representative at the FFAW. Time for a break. When we come back, this gentleman got a shout-out earlier from fish harvester from Lassie, Keith Bath. That's Owen Burt. He's running for the Liberals in Bay, Vert, Green Bay. He's next. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Say good morning to the Liberal candidate running in the by-election of Bay, Vert, Green Bay. That's Owen Burt. Good morning, Owen. You're on the air. Good morning, Paddy. Welcome to the show. You have to excuse my voice is not very good, but we'll try the best. It sounds okay so far. So Keith Bath called earlier. He's a fish harvester from Lassie. He says that you asserted that he was supporting you, and he took a concern with that and said he's not supporting you. He actually encouraged people to vote for anyone but a Liberal. But your reaction to what Mr. Bath had to say? Well, that accusation was completely false. Because, like I said, I called Mr. Bath right after that interview, and I said, Mr. Bath, where did you get your information? And he said, I heard it. No, Petty, that's not good enough. He should have told you where that information come from. Never, ever did I ever say that Mr. Bath was supporting me. He told me on the phone he was not supporting me because of the police situation that happened on the Confederation Hill. So I said, Mr. Bath, do not get on and lie about me on a situation like that. That is not fair. I got the utmost respect for Mr. Bath. He's the most respected fisherman in Newfoundland. And every time the fishing situation come up, topics, people said, you should call Keith Bath. And I call him out of respect for his knowledge. And I wanted to tell him. I grew up in the forestry industry. I'm not my mother's family from the Bay Vert Peninsula, Round Arbor actually, were a fishing family. But I'm not going to admit that I knew everything about the fishery. So how am I supposed to learn if I don't talk to people like Keith Bath, who's been on the air many, many times over the past 40 years? And I've respected his views. So I never, ever indicated to anybody. And Mr. Bath can pull a tape or pull somewhere, anybody that can confront me and say that I said that, I love for him to call you, because that is not true.
And fair enough, and then you've been given a chance to offer a rebuttal here this morning, shortly after Mr. Bath made those comments. But then he went on to talk specifically about the ongoing concerns in the fishery and the rallies that took place, or the protests that took place at Confederation Building, and the way that the government handled it and the way that the RNC were involved. And his suggestion is, because of that, he's trying to convince all fish harvesters to not vote for you and your party. What do you say to that?
Well, look, the Premier's made quite clear. I don't think we want to live in a country that the government dictates what the police do. That's for sure. So, I mean, all the threats and everything that was made on social media, that's what brought the presence there. And you think the Premier that wanted that to happen, or you think the Premier wanted to get anybody hurt? I explained all that to Mr. Batt. I can't see the logic in blaming the Premier for protecting the House of Assembly and the threats that were being thrown around on the social media.
Okay, but even in relation, I mean, I wasn't there. I saw some of the videos about what happened. It's kind of hard to break down through all of it to get to the brass tacks. But even if we talk about, in addition to the protest, or on top of the protest, just simply the way that it's unfolded the past couple of years, notably last year, 6-week type regarding snow crab, the inability to get things done to the full support of the harvesters. The unions say that they've come up with a model sharing agreement with the ASP, whether it be for crab or lobster or halibut. But harvesters, if you look at the fisheries forum online, they are not in line with what the government has quote unquote achieved here. Your message to them, and if you think this is only the first step, what do you think the next step is?
So, I mean, that is the exact reason why I call people like Mr. Bath. I mean, I wanted to learn from them and what message they to government. I felt that I'd be a very good negotiator over the years on different boards and unions and stuff I've been involved in. So I wanted to get their message. And when he's referring to an interview from the Fisherman's Broadcast, which, like I said, I've listened to for 40 years and listened to him many times. So I thought that was fair to ask him his opinion. But to say that I went out and said that he was voting for me, that is completely false.
And for Boyd, I mean, if that's the case, that works well enough for me. In the big scheme of things, you know, we see, like, for instance, Premier Fury is the only Liberal Premier in the country at this moment in time. And sitting governments have done rather poorly in by-elections for a variety of reasons, whether it be people be tired of it and or the state of the economy or state of affairs. And in this province, of course, the Liberals have been painted as being connected at the hip with the Prime Minister. And, of course, his polling numbers are through the floor. The Liberals, even in the by-election in Conception Bay, East Bell Island, really didn't have a big load of red Liberal signage either. They were trying to, you know, separate themselves. So when you're swimming upstream here, because things are not hunky-dory, there's lots of reasons why, but what's your message to folks that are saying, you know, I can't get behind the Liberals given what I'm experiencing today, whether it be with my job, rate of pay, price of groceries, all the rest of it? What do you say?
Patty, listen, there's no secret going door to door here that I heard the Trudeau issue come up as well. And I made it quite clear. Personally, and the Premier's made it clear on several occasions. But I've made it quite clear that I haven't supported Mr. Trudeau's in the last. I actually went with Mr. Small because I think the Liberals need to replace the leader. Now, a lot of people are probably afraid to come out and say that, but not me. We need a new leader in Ottawa for the Liberal government. And I said, I think that will bring them back in the polls that you're talking about. But anybody that thinks I'm following the federal government and agrees with a lot of the stuff they're doing, no, I'm not.
Give us some district or specific issues, because we know the fishery will be near the top of those concerns. But so what else? We talk about what people here at the door. So, you know, the Prime Minister, fair and ball, the fishery, okay. So some of the other notables will be healthcare, for instance. So what's the state of healthcare in your opinion in your riding and how, or your district, and how vocal are people on that one?
Well, like you said, we got Dr. Young, of course, as Chief of Staff in Spring Hill. I mean, they've been working very hard. I mean, this is not new to our district that we got problems in healthcare or the island or the country or the world. So, I mean, that team is working hard, and they made some good announcements last week. And, I mean, I got accused. I didn't even know what these announcements were until everybody else found out. So, I mean, to say you're, like, trying to do this now because of election. Well, I mean, Dr. Young was well defended that on social media. So, I mean, any news in healthcare is good for me and good for Bayvert and Lissie and also in Triton where they reopen the clinics. I'm happy for that. I mean, people don't want to be traveling these distances. And, I mean, with the price of gas and everything, and some of our roads that I want to get fixed up. That's the whole idea.
I appreciate the time. Would you like to say anything else this morning, Owen?
No, I just say to people, this is the first time I called you during the election. But, I mean, like you said, for Mr. Bat to come on and say that, I mean, I got the utmost respect for Mr. Bat, always did. And I called him right after your call, and I said, Mr. Bat, please do not go on and make an accusation like that if you got no backup. Oh, he said, people told me. I said, yeah, probably because of the election. But listen, find the clip and come to me or call me. My phone was open. He said he tried to call me. I've never received a call from Mr. Bat. So, I mean, I would have gladly told him. Like I said, I got the most respect. And how would I learn about the fishery, like they want me to know, if I don't talk to these people? He wasn't the only fisherman that I talked to in the area. So, I mean, that's what it's all about, learning that the topics that you're not familiar with the most.
I appreciate your time, Owen. I wish you good luck.
Thanks, old buddy. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Okay, so just about time for the break. Let's check in on the Twitter before we get there. Of course, we're VOCM Open Line. Follow us there. And an updated message regarding the show on last Friday. It has been uploaded, so it's there for your consideration. And I apologize for not replying to every single email on that front because there was a ton of them. So tell your friends if they were one of the group that were looking for a Friday show, it is now there for you. Email is openline@vocm.com. Okay, when we come back, last week we spoke to a fellow named Gary Sands. He's a senior VP with the group representing independent grocers. And, you know, we're not going to get too deep in the weeds with the code of conduct that Loblaw said they'll sign on to and for everybody else does. But if you're in the world of small independent grocers, I mean, it is obviously a battle with the big five that gobble up some 80% of the retail sales. So the struggles inside the supply chain and where some of the solutions lie and how they have to conduct business knowing that they're fighting against the biggest players in the industry on the continent. Gene Coleman with Coleman's Grocery right after this. Don't go away.
You're listening to a rebroadcast of VOCM Open Line. Have your say by calling 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626 and listen live weekday mornings at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the show. Before we get to our next call on line number 4, Norm Mercer, you're in the queue to talk about MHA raises and supported employment. And also Miles Russell is there to react to some of the consultations coming up with Happy City St. John's regarding housing. But let's go to line number 4. Say good morning to the Director of Operations with Coleman's Grocery. He's also on the General Board of Directors at the Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers. That's Gene Coleman. Good morning, Gene. You're on the air.
Hey, Patty. How you doing?
Best kind this morning. How about you?
Awesome, thanks.
Good, man. So we're not going to get too deep down into the weeds of the Code of Conduct because I know you're not on that working committee. So the basic intention is to make things fairer for the consumer and some dispute resolution tools. But, you know, this sounds like a funny question, but what's the actual intention here? Is it for more support for independents, or is it trying to rein in the big shots, or exactly how is this intended to work?
Yeah, so it's not just about the independent retailers, but this primary objective of the code is to help with the small, the medium retailers, producers, and processors. So the whole supply chain, and it's to provide a sense of fairness and transparency when these independents are getting supplied, and fairness and transparency for the suppliers themselves. I guess it all came out of the issues back in 2020 when we were dealing with COVID. You had factory shutdowns, and then you had a couple of big players, which it's well known in the news there. I don't need to mention them, but they started some arbitrary fees and outside of their contracts, and they started increasing their misshipment fees and marketing fees and listing fees. So that caused, I guess, the spur to say, look, we need some kind of code of conduct that's going to be fair and ethical, and that we got to try to get all players involved. There's about 10 other groups, one being the CFIG, that have worked to implement this code. They've done a great job. It's been a huge milestone for this group getting Loblaws on board last week. And, yeah, they hope to get now Walmart and Costco on board next, and I think that's going to have a great impact for the industry and deal with a lot of issues, and like I said earlier, bring that transparency to what's going on.
Yeah, because Loblaws were saying they weren't going to sign on because inside the dispute resolution could make prices even higher, which they couldn't really justify or elaborate on. It was just sort of a throwaway comment. But anyway, we'll see if all the big ones do indeed sign on. But I want to pick up on the supplier issue, because I think when Canadians look at the concern regarding food inflation, price points, shrinkflation, all those things, they basically aim their concerns at the retailer. But it's inside the world of the supply chain and the influence that the big five have over the supply chain, whether it be in equity and or the fact that they're ordering so much that they get preferential treatment. How does any of the code of conduct stuff, or even as an independent grocer, how big is that supply chain related matter? Because I think Canadians just look at the retailer, what we're paying at the cash, versus how it got to that point.
Well, the code of conduct will highlight if it will. It has pieces in place that you can't make these arbitrary changes and fees like they did back in COVID because the shipments were missed, and that'll help control some of the costs, because there's a trickle-down effect when you start charging your major suppliers all these fees in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, that just comes back in cost increases, which then get pushed not back to the big suppliers, but not just them, but also to the independents across the country. So having those checks and balances in place and having a set of guidelines as to how these contracts are written, there's going to be education tools in place to help independents and suppliers create better contracts that will address that. With that trickle-down effect, it will help control those costs, which in turn will help to keep prices in check.
The Competition Bureau has looked at your industry a couple of times, once in the criminal lens with the bread price-fixing scandal, but then also in the broad strokes of everything here. They talked about the possibility for more competition to bring down prices. And, of course, that makes sense conceptually because competition can indeed achieve that outcome. But they also talked about, competition inside the world of supply. So when you hear the Competition Bureau talk like that, do you believe that would be the case for Canadian consumers, that if we had more players, whether they be small, medium, independent, and or some of the big entities, for instance, from the United States, do you think that would make a difference?
I read that study, and in that report, they also stressed that yes, one recommendation was to also help and support and encourage the growth of independent grocers. I think that's obviously a better move rather than bringing up. We already have two major U.S. players in the market now, and to bring up another like an Aldi or someone who are going to source their products from Germany and Europe, and it's going to put more pressure on the local suppliers, local producers here in Canada. And I think the better move would to be, support the independents who are in those rural communities, buying from these local suppliers and producers, and support your communities in that way.
As an independent grocer of the size of Coleman's, how different is your approach to the supply chain? Because for the big ones, retail and groceries in particular is a science. We're not talking about arbitrary decisions being made here, especially when you look at the Walmarts and the Costcos and their purchasing power. So how do you have to have a different strategy for what you buy, what you feature on your shelves? Because you don't quite have the levers to pull that Walmart has, for instance.
No, but we're fortunate to have our own wholesale division within the Coleman Group of companies. So we've worked to build that, and we're now we're in a buying group that's a buying group across Canada. So that helps as well, UGI. And that helps get the buying power we need to stay competitive and to get the variety of products and new listings that you'd want to be competitive with the big five. In addition, we're also supplying on the island some other independent grocery stores through our wholesale division and building those relationships with them and other smaller wholesalers. So, that certainly helps.
I'm not going to try to draw a direct link here, but when we talk about retail outside of groceries, the trend since the beginning of the pandemic in particular has been to move to online. So all of a sudden, the small storefront retailer is competing directly with Amazon. I think there's somewhat of a correlation between Walmart, Costco, and the like, and entities such as yours. So people will talk about price point and selection. That's some of the arguments people make. Well, I'm not going to go to my local store. I'm going to go to Amazon because they got it all. They got a better price, better selection. What do you say to folks who have that as a consideration, that Costco is their destination, Walmart for their groceries, Dominion, Sobeys, and otherwise, because they think they can get more selection at a better price? What do you say to folks who shop with that in mind?
There's products online that you may not find in your local grocery store in communities across Canada. But I think in Newfoundland, especially for Coleman's, we have a lot of stores in rural communities, and it's the experience too, and it's the service that we provide. Customers come to our stores, and we have those relationships built with them, and if they're looking for a product, we try to meet their needs and bring products in for them to help them keep coming back, keep coming in through the door, and supporting your community local grocery store. I think online is a bigger presence in Ontario, not as much in Newfoundland, but it is growing. But I think there's always going to be a time and a place for shopping, the experience, seeing what you're buying, seeing the fresh produce, and that we offer, and our selection of meats, and you can't get that online, right?
While all of this kerfuffle has been unfolding over the last few years, what has it meant to your bottom line? Because we see the traction. I don't like going to Costco, but sometimes I keep my wife company, and it is a madhouse all the time there. What does it look like at your bottom line, say, for instance, from 2019 to today? And I know you're not going to divulge all your audited financials.
Like you had mentioned, you were chatting with Gary Sands last week, I think. Gary said publicly many times that grocery margins are very thin, and that's why every day we got to wake up and try to figure out how to do a better job and improve our service and control costs, and it's an evolving market, and we got to continue to change to be competitive and look at that competition as an opportunity to differentiate ourselves and say, look, what can we do different to be different from the big guys? And we try to hang our hat on service and quality. So there's always a challenge. It's not an easy ride for sure. You never know what's going to happen from one day to the other, but it's an exciting business too, and we're fortunate to be to be at it for so long and serving the communities of Newfoundland, and we've got 15 stores now throughout the island, and hopefully more to come.
I'm familiar with that circumstance of not knowing what's coming from day to day. Just last one very quickly. Is there any sort of timeline or deadline in mind for people to sign on to this code of conduct before it becomes stale?
No, I think it's if Loblaws haven't, if they hadn't signed on, it may have been in trouble. But I think it's we're on a. There's no set deadline, but the Minister Champagne, he said just a couple of days ago, he's going to be pushing Costco and Walmart to, and he feels confident that they will sign on to this. CFIG feels confident, and the other players at the board, Retail Council, and so on. So, we'll see what happens, but this is going to be a big step for the industry, not just the retailers, but the producers and the suppliers across Canada, and we're excited for this to finally be put to bed and help with help support those small, medium businesses and suppliers.
Yeah, I lied. This is the last one. So one of the concepts that gets me going is the whole concept of shrinkflation. So I'm paying the same or more for less. And I know you have no control for some of your big suppliers for some of the name brand stuff that might hit your shelves. But right. For any in-house produced goods, has that been something that you've had to entertain? Whether it be reducing the number of slices in a loaf of bread or whatever the case may be, so I get less, pay the same or more?
Absolutely not. No. Again, we hang our head on quality and value, and we that's not a road we ever go down. Some of the big suppliers, they're struggling with getting raw materials, and they got the wars going on, the conflicts in Ukraine, and the droughts and climate change and floods. So they're under a lot bigger pressure in getting raw materials for products, which is why we still see some supply challenges with out of stocks and so on. But it certainly has improved since 2020, and hopefully it will continue to further improve.
Appreciate your time this morning, Gene.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay,
bye-bye. Gene Coleman, Director of Operations at Coleman's Grocery. Let's take a break. When we come back, Norm, you're next to talk about the proposed raises for MHAs here in the province. Maybe you want to talk about the MP raises. They got some 4.2% pay bump based on some of the negotiated wages upwards in the private sector, And then Miles is there to talk about the consultation on housing in the city of St. John's. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go. Line number 1. Good morning, Norm Mercer. You're on the air.
Oh, hello. Hello, Patty. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I calling in as a resident from Mount Pearl, and I just wanted to call in to discuss several issues, but the one that's closest to my heart, certainly, which involves over the years my son Stephen, who has an intellectual disability, is the recent news that's been coming out by Minister Byrne and also by several of the Supported Employment Corporation representatives around the province. And this concerns the huge cut that the federal government are looking at making to the labor market agreements, and which could have a direct impact on the opportunities, which are limited for individuals who have disabilities, individuals who have intellectual disabilities, to access the labor market. And a shining star throughout the country, and Newfoundland and Labrador has been a leader in that, is in the supported employment area. So I don't have all of the information yet. I served on the board of Visions Employment in the Mount Pearl Paradise CBS area for many years, and prior to that it was through an association for community living that a number of us parents had formed back in the early 1990s, and a number of our parents who were involved had sons or daughters who were beyond school and of adult age, and who had, for the most part, very limited opportunities to access employment or community. So we worked hard at it at the time, and were fortunate enough to form a community-based employment corporation, supported employment, and many individuals in this region and certainly throughout the province have had the opportunity to gain meaningful employment based on an individual basis with job trainers or job coaches. And as I say, for many of these people, and the reality is for most people with disabilities, they live in poverty and they live on the margins. This has been a godsend as far as for an excellent program of accessibility and inclusiveness. And so when Minister Byrne raised it and several of the corporations raised it, it just astounded me that the federal government would take such a backward step and really have this type of impact on some of the most vulnerable in our society.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you said something that might be coming. It's coming. Confirmed straight up from the minister responsible federally. That's Randy Boissonneau, who we had on this program. So this is happening. And so what was $3.5 billion last year in the transfers to the provinces and territories has been slashed by $625 million. The reduced amount of money here is about $16.5 million. There is still $142 million on the table, but that reduction is problematic. So not to alienate one organization or another, because there's some 17 of these support groups or organizations in the province, but like Avalon Employment Incorporated, you said they were recognized worldwide. They were. The United Nations in 2021 said it was a world-leading top-level service, and it has been extremely valuable for people to get the type of support and have the advocacy in their corner to show employers that they're employable. So this is a huge problem, and I'm with you. I don't really understand the rationale behind it. Basically, the federal minister said it's up to the province to pick up the slack here, of which the province has said they will indeed do for the next 6 months while they try to figure out what's next. But yeah, this is not a great circumstance, to say the very least.
No, and the thing is, it was back 25 years ago when the federal government of the time, and it was wrapped up mostly within the Right Futures Agreement, which was to be able to remove individuals, to have them access community living abilities, people that were housed in several of the institutions in the province. And I remember when Federal Minister Bouchard, the other Bouchard, who was in the Mulroney government, and I spoke to him at length, and he said this is the right thing to do. And at that time, the federal government recognized that they did not have the human resources or the community outreach capacity to deliver this part of the labor market opportunities to individuals with intellectual disabilities in general, and also those on the autism spectrum. So, I mean, this is a very significant step backwards. I know just for my son, Stephen, he accessed employment with several different companies and organizations over the past 20-odd years since he's been away from school. Right now, he's on the active waiting list, and I, as one parent and as one advocate, am not going to stand by and see a program which is noted as leading edge and amongst the most vulnerable, for this to be able to move forward without a lot of advocacy.
Sure, and so you mentioned Bouchard. That was Lucien Bouchard?
That was the gentleman who became premier in Quebec was the other Bouchard. This was, I forget his first name, but he was here along with the provincial ministers. I mean, we entertained the senior people in the labor market field with the federal government, and they were astounded by the programs run by Avalon, by Visions, by many others throughout the province. They're community-based with volunteer boards of directors, staff. The funding comes through the feds and the province, flows through the various corporations, and hundreds of individuals who are, as I say, are on the very margins of society, have had the opportunity to be gainfully employed, many of them for many, many years. And it's such a backward step. I'm just astounded by it when you look at all the billions of dollars that they're easily rolling out in subsidies for major corporations worldwide, and to go and peg this on the most vulnerable is shameful.
Yeah, and the federal budget was about $535 billion, and additional new spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $46 billion. So it's curious as to how this was a carve-out. How did they arrive at this as a place that should carve back money? It is amazing to me. Before we run out of time and get to the news, did you want to talk about the MHA pay raise or the proposal?
Yeah, well, like I say, I mean, I spoke out on this to Tim Power's show there most recently. But, Patty, what group do you know of in the province or in the country who can basically control their own wages and benefits? I mean, these individuals are our employees. Now, I've said that to several ministers over the years. They don't like to hear it, but they work for us. They work for the people, and they should not be deciding what their salary should be. It should be independent. It should be arm's length, and a group made up of a broad section of consumers, residents of the province. It was always the thought to try to have the public service in all sectors through the public purse on a par with Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick. And they are today, like a number of years ago when the spending scandal was on, I spoke out strongly on it, because at that time I think they were amongst the top three being paid in the country. As that gentleman said there when you were talking to him there earlier, the Liberal candidate for the district Springdale Bay Verde area, he said that he reaches out to people to learn. So they're almost apprentices. And many of them, anyway, I can get so upset about this, but I understand this morning as I was coming back from a healthcare appointment, and I want a big shout out to healthcare, because as far as the appointment process and getting in to get tests done, I find it excellent. But as far as when it comes to this, a $25,000 increase to individuals that are either on par or make more than the average legislator in Atlantic Canada, I think is totally shameful. Now, they can wrap it up in the bow and call it strengthening democracy. But all I say is what I said to Tim Powers. What happened to public service?
Yeah.
What happened to that? That's what I don't understand. It's like, get as much as you can for a couple of terms, and then out you go. Like, I mean, the commission that was set up back a number of years ago when we had over $4 million of our money stolen by a number of these characters, and they wouldn't admit to it. If they were men or women, they'd stand to the line and admit it, but they didn't, and so we know what went on. But the commission that came in said they've got the golden ring, they got the golden handshake, and if others have said, as far as a raise, they should get no different than most all the other public servants. 2%, 2%, 2%, 2%, and wrap it up in a bow, but it's still not an unfair gift. And I'll guarantee you the next politician that comes to my door, I want to see their resume, because most of them in there are making more money now than they ever made in their lives.
Yeah, well, that would make their salary, even for a backbencher, $120,000 per year, make them the highest paid elected officials in Atlantic Canada. They'll argue that this is not them recommending the raise. They'll say, well, the Members' Compensation Review Committee recommended the raise, but come on, we can't split that here for any meaningful conversation. One of the problems inside of this, Norm, is that it's very much like the tuition freeze at MUN. It lasted for so long that when it was eventually going to go away, we saw a huge increase. The MHA salary has not increased since 2009, but that does not justify a $25,000 immediate pay bump. It just doesn't, as far as I'm concerned, anyway.
If it was based on over 4 years, 2% a year as the average public servant who darn well works hard. I worked in the public service for 33 years, and all I say, anyway, I met lots of these characters. There's only a few I ever had respect for, and for most of them, it's what they can get out of it. Now, that might sound harsh, and I've been told before by different ministers, Norm, you're not making any friends on the Hill. But listen, half the time, what do? They go around to banquets and other occasions. Many times they send their district assistant, not at 100,000, but at a lot less. A lot of what they do, and okay, come summer, what will they be doing most of the summer? They'll be off. Christmas, they're off for almost a month. I can go down through it. And as I say, in my years in government and since, I've only ever seen one minister with a bit of sweat on his brow. And as far as the rest of it, they're paid enough. And that's the last I'll say on that.
Yeah, so increasing the 40 salaries by just shy of $25,000 costs about $985,000-ish per year more. So it is not insignificant, and I appreciate your time and your concern. Norm, next time we'll talk mining.
Let's talk prospecting and mining, because that's what's going to generate new discoveries, new mines, jobs, revenues for government, and hopefully to help address some of the issues, whether it's in housing, food, healthcare, and you name it. But like I say, This is going to go to the House of Assembly. I talked to a lot of different people, and I know the poll that VOCM did, and it was almost 80% said they should not get this type of raise.
Appreciate the time. Look forward to the next chat.
Guaranteed. All the best to you, sir.
Thanks, Norm. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And in that world, I didn't want to keep Norm on because I got to get to the news, but the whole issue regarding critical minerals and opportunities here and supply chain and all the rest, I think it's a fascinating area of conversation. And it is a little bit hard to wrap your mind around. You know, we can talk about subsidies from the feds to like electric vehicle battery plants and the like, but global lithium prices dropped by 75%. Last year, cobalt, graphite, nickel, added a couple of, all dropped by between 30 and 45%. Battery prices declined by almost 15%. So there's still some big questions to be asked there. Let's take a break. Miles, you stay right there. Talk about housing. Don't go away.
The Tim Powers Show. Join the conversation weekday afternoons at 4 p.m. on your VOCM.
Welcome back to the show. Well, as we know, North America, pretty much a car-centric culture. But Miles Russell wants to remind folks that streets are for people. Let's go to line 3. Good morning, Miles. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How you doing?
I'm doing great this morning. Thanks for asking. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, so yesterday, David Brake, he's the co-chair of Happy City, called in. We've been summoned by them. They've asked us to help them with a report looking at the city's new text amendment for the Housing Accelerator Fund brought to you by the federal government. So St. John's has stepped in. They're going to get $10.7-ish million or 10.3, somewhere around there, more than 10. And that is to amend our regulations. And the goal is to increase housing. So there is the regulatory side of it, and then there's the data analysis. So that's why we were brought in. So our not-for-profit, we have about 5 main members, and we use GIS and a couple other pieces of software. We look at Statistics Canada data, blah, blah. So what we have, we looked at the 3 main factors of what the city's proposing. They're looking at adding rear lot accessory dwelling units. That'd be a first for St. John's. They're looking at adding corner lot residential R1, that's your single detached homes, being multiplex. They can become multiplexes. And then a rough 15% increase on height for all apartment buildings. So Happy City came to us and said, what does this actually do? Like, what's the mathematics behind it on what's existing? What do we see across the country? And then what do we expect the City of St. John's to do in the next 10 years with or without this policy? So that's what I want to talk about. And then,
sure.
And we can jump at any one if you want. You pick.
Well, fair enough. I mean, when we talk about densification versus urban sprawl, that density comes with a concern regarding whether it be traffic calming, and the like. So where do you want to start? You're the person doing the work.
Well, yeah, so I guess you bring up a good question. So we're actually, don't get me wrong, I am a person who wants to look at fiscal, social, and environmentally equitable urban planning. That does involve less cars. I'm not saying get rid of cars, but aside from what the city's proposing, they're actually not changing anything to do with our engineering manuals, and that's actually what guides the construction. The planning manuals tell you like what you can do. The engineering manuals tell us how to do it. That's our road curvatures, our width of roads, our piping infrastructure. But in this regulation, the city's actually not doing anything with the streets themselves, which is problematic when the new Envision regulations are making residential roads go from 15 meters to 25 meters wide. That's less units per hectare. That's worse for developers. They're not making units any smaller. So affordability is not going to be addressed by this, just on the merits of the roads. So moving aside from just cars, let's just look at, say, the accessory rear lot dwelling unit. So we approached an organization out of basically based out of Vancouver and Winnipeg called the Canada Backyard Housing Association. They look at the only cities in Canada that have rear lot accessory dwelling units. And to clarify what those are, that if any one of us who own a single detached home in St. John's, if you've got a backyard that's big enough, the City of St. John's is going to permit you to put a house back there, a tiny little house, and it has ratios. It can't be bigger than a third the size of your original house. It has to be still a certain distance away from power lines, etc. And they're seeing in Winnipeg, Calgary, Toronto, and Edmonton 1% conversion rate over 5 years. So in St. John's, for example, we have 21,000 single detached homes. That would mean 210 houses will build these rear lot units. Now, we could go, and that's just not factoring in anything to do with geometry. But unlike Winnipeg or Toronto or Calgary or Edmonton, we're not flat. So a good chunk of our lot can't even be developed because the drop-off in the back of your property is too steep. So the City of St. John's is kind of using a lot of airy-fairy terms but not giving us analysis. That's where we want to step in. So, like, right off the hop, we're seeing their projection of what they think will be built for rear lot ADUs or accessory dwelling units. We're seeing what they think might be 20,000 units being more like 600, and that's at an optimal size.
So is that what they're guessing? It's 20,000?
Well, so the city doesn't give any numbers. They're basically just saying that we are going to approve any rear lot ADU on any single detached home. But when you analyze it, it doesn't show up as a lot of units. And the goal of this whole Housing Accelerator Fund is to increase the growth rate of the city's housing inventory and to focus on more affordable units. So this could address it. It's just, just simply from terrain and the amount of space between our houses, being able to fit the pipes through, it just doesn't make sense. And that's just one of the three factors. So again, then there's the corner lots on the houses. A lot of people tonight and tomorrow, today down at 7 p.m. at the 4 a.m. building, you mentioned it yesterday, that's the public consultation. I'll be down there, a couple other members from Streets for People and Happy City. But on top of that, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that when I was hearing the city speak to these types of issues, the backyard development just kind of came across to me as whether or not it was aspirational, had some real significant numbers involved. It was just one of the tools in the tool belt because we're talking about density and we're talking about duplexes and triplexes and taller apartment buildings and the like. So it never sounded to me like that they thought this was the panacea. It was just one of those things that across the country is being entertained.
Exactly. So that's one. Basically, there's three chunks of this that are the largest impact. The other one, there are many other changes, but they're inconsequential. The city is not adding single detached, the city is not adding semi-detached homes or plex units or townhouses anywhere in the rest of R1. It's only the corner lots and only to become a multiplex unit. So the detached homes, rear accessory dwelling units, you're right. It's not important, and it's also not going to really be beneficial. So if we look at those corner lots, There's exactly, because we counted them, there's 2,222. Audit worked to that number. That's the number of existing corner lots in St. John's that are on R1 zone. So we don't see this type of development anywhere else in the country. We haven't been able to find, now it might exist in some small city somewhere in Alberta or Ontario somewhere, but we can't find a corner lot specific multiplex comparison. But if we use a comparison rate of existing developments using a new regulation to redevelop, we're still seeing around 1%. So of those lots, we're seeing potentially, of those 2,222 existing R1 corner lots, we might get another 22 structures, which would be around 88 units. And that's over a 4-year span where we'd see, and this 1% conversion rate is over 4 years in these other cities. So it's not really going to do it. Now, we do have future development as well. And we could potentially see more if the city enforced these regulations on the remaining 170-ish remaining hectares of developable land in St. John. That's all that's left. So if we take 407. There's 407 hectares remaining of developable land in St. John's. That's what's zoned and capable. That means the infrastructure doesn't require any additional lift stations. We don't require any additional pump highs for water storage or anything like that. So of that area, we could get another couple thousand, but the city would need to enforce the rear lot ADUs. They'd need to enforce the corner lot multiplexes, and they'd need to enforce the height, basically telling people to go higher. They probably won't, because, again, it's a factor of construction. I mean, if you're selling a bunch of regular houses, single detached homes at a high price, it's going to be $400,000 entry point, there's no real incentive for a developer to build that ADU from the get-go. It could be a selling point, but we're not seeing that in other cities as well. We're not seeing new developments do that. It's almost all existing houses building that mainly to sell an additional piece of land. And those factors aren't in there either.
Miles, anything else you'd like to broach this morning? Because we can indeed pick this up another time. I'm just late for the break, and I'd hate to go too far.
Yeah, no, I mean, basically the gist of what we want to talk about tonight, and what the report is with Happy City, the long of it, Patty, is that the city is, I don't want to say pulling the wool over people's eyes, but what they're suggesting isn't going to majorly impact the housing inventory. They're not directly going after broad zoning reform, which is what they need to do. They need to allow developers to have the choice. They need to make smaller roads, and they really need to factor in public transit using transit-oriented development. Every city we looked at is doing that except for us. Even Halifax is doing transit-oriented development, where they factor in parking and things like that based on buses. So we're going to get more of that tonight, and the main report's going to come out before the end of the month, but we're going to have a good chunk of it squared away for the public to analyze today. Thanks again for the time. Love chatting about this stuff with you, Patty. Me too. I appreciate your time. And you just mentioned Halifax. Halifax is on wheels. It is unbelievable, the activity going on economically and housing development and development on the waterfront. It's amazing what's happening in Halifax. Appreciate your time. Stay in touch, Miles. All right, cheers. Thanks. Okay, bye-bye. There you go. Miles Russell. Good chats with Miles. I mentioned Chase Hayes and Cape Breton for some unknown reason off the top of the show. There's one on the go this weekend if you're so inclined. There's a Chase Hayes and Cape Royal Sunday from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at the Riverside Restaurant. It's hosted by the Cape Royal Church Committee. The starting jackpot is $7,272. Last week, the 50-50 prize was over $1,000. So there you go for the folks working with the Cape Royal Church Committee. Final break of the morning. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 4. Ruby, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Good morning.
Hope you're having a good morning, interesting show.
So far, so good.
I want to make a comment on Mr. Len Paddock's comments that he made about how our doctors been brought in from India. I'd like to let Mr. Paddock know that I've had a doctor for the last 13 years that's from India, and I have no problems, no issues whatsoever with him. And it's a racist remark that he made, and I really don't think I would want, if I was living in Green Bay, to have him representing me. It's nothing short of racist on the remarks that he made.
Dr. Patel was my father's doctor for years. Look, a couple of things. So if he really meant it the way he said it, that's a problem. If to take his words that, in the heat of the moment and it was offered clumsily and he apologized and said that's not where his head or his heart is, then I think that changed the conversation somewhat. But if he really truly means it the way he said it, I don't know why people wouldn't think it is a problem.
I really think he meant it, because if he didn't mean it, why did he even say it? Why was the thoughts even in his mind? Why did he say bring them in from Germany? I have no issues with anyone from Germany either. I have a really good friend from Germany, and I love her like a sister. But that doesn't make it right for him to make those kind of remarks in a position that he was in. Personally, I think Mr. Wakeham, I think you should remove him from this position if you want to have a half chance on winning the next election.
I wonder what kind of impact it's going to have.
Pardon me?
I wonder what kind of impact it's actually going to have.
I think it's going to have an impact, because if you look at the clinic in Springdale, most of the time they are with Indian doctors or a doctor from, it doesn't matter where they're from, they're foreign doctors. And to me, there are no difference whether they're from Germany, whether they're from India. But he made sure that he made a remark that made a difference. And I don't think an apology is good enough. A man in his position that was in the military, worked with different cultures, I'm sure, from all over the world. Why did he pick on India? Answer that question. If he can answer that question for me, and it wasn't a slip of a tongue, I really don't believe that.
I can't speak for the man, and I said my piece about it yesterday morning, and if anyone wants to chime in, they're more than welcome. That's what the show is all about. And you're not alone, but of course there's plenty of people out there defending what he said, whether or not they say it's true, when in fact I'm not so sure there's any evidence to bear out that the Indian and Pakistani doctors are just using this as a stepping stone. And the relationship or the comment about Germany, like, I'm not even sure where that comes from, because apparently in the last, I think the number was 5 years, there's been exactly 0 doctors recruited from Germany. So I'm not even sure how that factors in to his thoughts. I think he said something along the lines with folks from Germany are more inclined to love the outdoors or something, as I think what he said.
I think is what he said as well. To me, anyway, I will watch how this unfolds very carefully. I am originally from Green Bay, and I do live in the city right now. I do have an Indian doctor, in which I love very much. And I certainly do not appreciate the comment that Mr. Paddock made. Anyway, getting from that one, I'd just like to touch on the congratulations to the road that went in the name of Beaton Talk yesterday. And congratulate the Talk family.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. And I mean, the family is really quite pleased, and fair enough. I mean, whether or not people were supporter of him and his party, he was in public service for decades, had that very brief stint for about 4 months sitting in the Premier's chair. I knew Beaton Talk a little bit. I thought he was a good guy. And of course, we can debate the politics and the achievements or successes, but, you know, if they thought that was the right thing to do, and once again, if it's good enough for the wife and the daughters or the children, then fair ball with me. So it's going to be between Musgrave Harbour and Carmenville, I guess, is that stretch.
I worked for Beaton Talk for 7 years, so I have a lot of it. He's gone, but I have a lot of respect and had a lot of respect for him. So I think that this was well earned by Beaton Talk.
Fair enough. I appreciate the time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
You take good care. Bye, Ruby. Will we save the last caller for tomorrow, Dave, so we can give her a reasonable amount of time? Is that what you're discussing with her now? Okay, so let's do that. So there's a caller, and there's only about a minute to go in the program, and that's not enough time for anyone to make a point on matters of importance. Final checking on the Twitter box for the morning. We're VOCM Open Line. Follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. Still a few big issues regarding whether or not there's even detailed legislation coming forward to see the federal budget passed. And yes, been lots of reaction about the reduction in amount of money for employment support organizations, of which there's some 17 across the province. And of course, if we didn't get to an issue of concern to you today, we can absolutely do it tomorrow. You can communicate with me on social media, send me an email, or my favorite is when you pick up the phone and give us a shout. All right, good show today. We will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning, right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.